You talked about the things you really liked about Extraordinary Attorney Woo, so it sounds like you really liked the show. Well, it is really seductive. That sounds like a bad thing. I believe in acknowledging the good in something, especially when we're stuck with it. I mean, the show exists. It's highly popular. It's not going away. So I want to amplify the things that are good about it, but we also need to acknowledge the very real and very harmful things that it's doing. So people shouldn't like the show or watch it. I'm not here to sway anyone's enjoyment to or away from anything, but I think we should all educate ourselves on different perspectives so that we are consuming things with our eyes fully open to both the positive and the very real negative influence a show can have on people's lives. So, I mean, with that in mind, I think everyone should watch this creator's playlist on the show. It's sobering. I'll definitely check their videos out. Do you have anything to add? I do, and I want to add weight behind their observation that Young-woo is a very docile autistic. She's highly attractive, she's acquiescent, and she's infantilized and treated like a pet by most everyone. And that's because her autism is docile. What do you mean by that? The way her autism manifests isn't disruptive. She doesn't have to miss work because of overload. She doesn't have to excuse herself from meetings. She doesn't have major emotional responses, even to incredibly emotional cases or when people are screaming at her. Like, her autistic traits barely need any accommodation at all. All of her autistic traits are maybe weird, but still cute and adorable. Exactly. So everyone wants to make her their pet. I really, really hope that by the end of this season, she gets, 1, a backbone and starts having her own agency, telling people off and the like, and 2, that we see some autistic traits that actually need accommodations. We're stuck with the show, so you're hoping things start turning around. Yeah, we've kind of seen her stand up to her dad and start to seek her own independence, which is a good start, but we have a long way to go. What other problems does the show have? Well, the Korean title of the show is literally Weird Attorney Woo. That doesn't sit well with me. No. And I have criticism of the English subtitles. I don't know how it's said in Korean, but they chose to translate everything in person-first language, and the majority of English-speaking autistic communities prefers identity-first language. What's that? So I prefer to say that I am autistic, or they are an autistic person, rather than I have autism, or they are a person with autism. Sorry, what's the difference? Well, saying I'm a person with autism makes it sound like I have a disease. Saying that I am autistic emphasizes that autism is an integral part of who I am, and that it is a legitimate neurotype, not something that's wrong with me. I see. I hear that in episode 3, though, they do a great job of showing that there's a spectrum of autism. That's actually the episode I had some of the most problems with. For example, in this scene, they're introducing the other spectrum of autism by introducing this autistic character who is a larger person accused of murder.
약속했어. 잘하자.
I get that maybe they're playing on stereotypes so that they can address them and dismantle them later in the show, but this was way too much. Yeah, that crossed the line. But also in this episode, they completely miseducate the audience on the spectrum of autism. That's where I have real issues.
김정훈 씨는 정신 연령이 6세에서 10세 정도인 중증도의 자폐인인데
There is no severity to autism. Intellectual ability has nothing to do with autism. It is a co-occurring condition. This reinforces harmful myths about autism, and it gets worse.
자폐가 있어도 머리 좋은 경우가 종종 있다고 듣긴 했는데 대부분 우리 정훈이 같잖아요.
This is so incredibly false and harmful. Wait, that's not true? 70% of people who have been diagnosed with autism have 0 intellectual disabilities. And as our understanding of autism expands and we find that more people like me are autistic, there are estimates that that number is actually closer to 85 or even 90%. So the show, while claiming to expand people's understanding that autism is a spectrum, has just grossly misinformed their audience and reinforced harmful stereotypes. The only thing that I can think of is that they have different parameters for diagnosing autism in Korea than in the US. that could be the case. The problem is that the show's being distributed globally, and obviously no one at Netflix checked that the autism representation was accurate. Like, if the original dialogue was problematic, that could have been addressed in subtitle translations that were accurate. I can see how that causes a lot of issues for autism understanding as a whole on a global scale. Netflix is responsible for ensuring that the shows that they distribute are equitable for marginalized groups, but the scene doesn't stop there. There's more.
나아질 거라는 희망을 갖기에는 너무 오래 걸리잖아요.
This is an astronomically ableist thing to say, and I get that her character is ableist, but her statements aren't contradicted by anybody within the show, so it reinforces that this perspective is okay. Okay, spell out what specifically is not okay about this. Number one, autism is autism. There is no getting better. There's nothing to get better from. That would be like saying that someone who is learning how to drive is getting better from their medical deficiencies of lack of intelligence evidenced by their inability to drive. Like, we can learn new things and new skills. We can learn behaviors that might make people treat us differently, but there aren't intrinsic deficits to cure. We're not getting better from autism. Yeah, that completely invalidates your entire neurotype. Exactly, and I hope that later in the season they educate the audience that this kind of perspective is not okay. But I was really disheartened to hear that so many people were saying that they learned this great new perspective from this. Not directly addressing those ableist moments is problematic. What were some of the other problematic moments? I have a lot more than I can ever cover, but a lot of the problems I'm having are autistic myths that aren't being presented with nuance or accuracy.
상대의 눈을 딱 보는 게 자폐인한테는 세상에서 제일 어려운 일이야.
A fair number of autistics don't have problems with eye contact at all, and many just find it uncomfortable. Not the hardest thing in the world. Yeah, it wouldn't have been that hard to have her dialogue be like, yeah, not every autistic finds eye contact uncomfortable, but she has a real problem with it. Something. And there's a bunch of other things too, like they keep showing Woo Young-woo's friends putting their arm around her when it is so obvious that she doesn't like to be touched. This is some of that infantilizing and treating her like a pet. Repeatedly showing this communicates to the audience that it is okay to do this to an autistic person, even though it makes them uncomfortable. Again, I hope these things get addressed later in the show and that Woo Young-woo calls them out. It sounds like Woo Young-woo's very character construct is the big glaring issue with the show. I mean, she is the autistic representation. If she were a good representation, many of the issues would be fixed. I mean, look at Juno's treatment of Woo Young-woo. How he respects and romantically pursues her is really undermined because she is written as such an object of cuteness to be possessed by those around her. If Woo Young-woo had been a firecracker with real accommodation needs who disrupted society around her, it would make his affections mean something. As it is, it feels a little icky because of her docility. I'm kind of shocked that people weren't commenting on how absurd it is that it's revolutionary for a character to like an autistic character for who they are. Like, why is that revolutionary? We have had to have an incredibly low bar. I mean, we're still fighting for representation that shows that we should be allowed to exist. So how would you rate the autistic representation in the show overall? I mean, in some ways it's a step forward, but like that step is maybe a millimeter forward and it's followed by a full step back. So in terms of overall equitable autism representation through global distribution, I'd say it's a stretch to give it a 1 out of 10. I think the show is doing some good, but if you think a 1 is too harsh, I really recommend going and watching this other creator's playlist. It's worth it.